Go ahead and start record. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Dolin. I'm the president and founder of Educational Connections Tutoring and Test Prep. We're all so excited to be with you today. We're talking about summer learning and what to do when camps and all your plans are kind of up in the air. Maybe some camps have been canceled. Maybe you're not sure if others will go on without a hitch. But regardless, we're all in this together. So today, my panel of experts and I are bringing you some solutions on how to make this a really great summer, despite everything that's going on. So first, I want to welcome my panelists. I have Maria Zimmitti from Georgetown Psychology, Sara Weiser from Good Beginnings,
Hello.
Provide OT Speech, and Allison Sibley from the Sibley Group in Washington, D.C., and Steve Harner from Child and Family Associates of Greater Washington. So I'd love for each person just to quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. Maria, can I begin with you?
Sure. Hello. Happy to be here again. I am the clinical director at Georgetown Psychology, and we have offices in Virginia, DC, and Maryland, and are currently running 100% teletherapy successfully.
Nice. Thank you, Maria. Sara, welcome.
Hi, Anne. Thanks so much. I'm from Good Beginnings. We do PT and OT for kids, and we have offices in Herndon and Falls Church, and we are also on teletherapy now, opening soon for limited patients, but right now on teletherapy as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Sara.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison Sibley of the Sibley Group, and we have a family therapy practice in DC. We see young kids in play therapy all the way up to parents and couples. And typically we're open 7 days a week in the office. These days we're 100% virtual and even running some groups and with little kids and play therapy virtually. Nice. And it's going pretty well. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Allison. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Anne. I'm Steve Harner. I'm with Child and Family Associates, and we are a collaborative group of therapists that provide individual, group, family, more cognitive behavioral skill building, strength-based type of therapy. And we also do evaluation. And like everybody else, we've been successfully converted back to this telehealth world. And it's been some pretty exciting work. So, and as Maria said, I'm happy to be on this call again with you all.
Great. Thanks, Steve. All right. So let's dig in. You know, this summer is going to be unlike no other summer before. It's going to be so different in that our kids probably are going to have a lot more time. So my first question to our panel, I'm going to start with Sara and Allison because I want to focus first on younger kids and then I'm going to get to older kids. But what do we do on those days that there's not a ton of structure and we want to provide structure for our kids so they're staying somewhat busy and productive? Sara, how do you think parents should go about this?
Yeah, so I think as parents, we often forget kids really thrive on structure and routine. And the little ones, they're very visual. So thinking about that visual schedule like they had in school, a lot of times you're used to seeing it there. But thinking about that visual schedule and creating one, and to make it a little more flexible for the summer, however sort of works for your family, but you can, let the kids make the choices, do Velcro so they can sort of pick the different pictures that they want and put on it to make that day and that flexibility of the day. But just thinking about bringing that visual in. Something else I really like with kids, kids also like control and are always looking for that control. So I do something that's called choice list choice. Instead of those sort of yes and no questions or those more controlling questions of it's time to go outside, let's go. It's, we're going to go outside now. Do you want to walk or do you want to hop to get there? Or when we get outside, do you want to do bubbles or do you want to, play on the playground or what, out back or whatever it is. So thinking about giving kids a little more choice and a little more structure in that way.
I love that. Thanks, Sara.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about parents working at home and trying to provide structure and what that's going to look like. And I think for kids, we need to keep in mind for the summer flexible structure. So lighten up a little bit, loosen up, but still have it. So have a, have a morning, an idea of what the morning is going to be generally on most days, and then have a backup plan when it all falls apart. Same thing with the afternoon. And I think when working with the whole child, we like to think of activities that will target the mind, body, and then the connecting piece, the social piece, which is a little bit hard to do virtually. But so for instance, is there a time of day that your kids really need some outdoor activity? And is there a way to perhaps even pair that with another family in your germ circle as the summer loosens a little bit to do, a physically distanced walk or scavenger hunt in Rock Creek Park or somewhere where it can be safely done, and it could give the other parents perhaps a couple hours to work. And the same thing with flip-flopping parent schedules. Perhaps one person works better in the morning and the other parent deals with the kids' morning routine, and vice versa. So I'm trying to think about it from the whole family perspective, as well as how do we move the mind and body to manage energy, basically, and boredom.
Thank you. Yeah, that's super helpful. Thanks, Allison. Let's move on to older kids. So middle and high school kids, and they can be very different from dealing with 6-year-olds, for example. I'm wondering, Steve, how would you suggest a parent provide structure to an older student?
Well, in my own family, I'm brought back to something I learned a long time ago, which is like the 5 Ps. Proper planning prevents poor performance. And it just brings it back all the more now as my kids are about to end school. And what it makes me think about is kind of as parents, maybe to sit first and just do some proper planning, maybe for ourselves to brainstorm what we know of our teens' interests, even from the past, like what did they most like to do when he or she was 9, 11, 12? And just because they might not have been doing it more recently doesn't mean that that could be something that they could start to look into now. So I had this one teenage girl where she surprised her mom by saying, "Hey mom, can you order me some scrapbooking stuff?" And she hasn't been scrapbooking since, I think she was 11 or so. So it's just interesting how these kids in the boredom may go back to something that they previously liked. And it's also a way to get them off of screen time too. But I also think when I coach parents around this, as we've been talking about it, is what are the parents' objectives for the summer? There's a couple sets of parents where they've come up with these objectives that are a filter, if you will, of how they're going to approach the summer. So they may say to their teens to say, look, there's 3 things that we need for your daily, right? So each day we have to focus on accomplishing something productive that's not involving screens, could be a chore, an activity outside, some meaningful family time, and then maybe just some time with your friends or whatnot. So not to get it too caught up in all of the screen time stuff. So I'm finding that people are very, very creative. And one of the other ways that we've been creative is brainstorming ideas. And we've done that in the practice and also in my own family about putting up some sticky pads up on, like, what are some things that you did in the past that, you could be bringing back, maybe another column for what are ideas that the teenager could do on their own, and maybe another column, what are some things that they could do as a family. But Anne, I think you had some thoughts about this too, right?
Sure, Steve, I love that idea. And in fact, I used to do this with my kids when they were really young, but I hadn't done it in a very long time. And so when we were talking about this the other day as a group getting prepared for this, I thought, you know what, I'm going to do that with my kids. And now they're kind of old. They're 20, and my son's girlfriend was here too. And I'll just show you what it turned out to look like. Let me just share this really quick and go back a bit here. Hold on. So this is actually for a presentation I'm going to give this afternoon. But this is what ended up, our chart ended up looking like. So what I did is I said to my kids and girlfriend, what are the things that you want to learn about or that you want to do this summer? And I set the timer for 5 minutes, and all of us, we each had a little Post-it notes, and we scribbled down all the things we wanted to accomplish. And after 5 minutes, each person got up and presented. And then each person also organized their list for their top 3 things. So Peyton said she's taking an online class. She wanted to complete all her summer course activities. One of my kids said he wanted to learn to weld and make a lamp. The other one said he wanted to research and camp at Spruce Knob. I said I want to study for my boating lesson. And Allison said one of the things her kids came up with was to research and purchase she calls it a rodent. Guinea pig. Sounds nicer. Build a garden. She also mentioned creating an outdoor mural. So that's just an easy way to get kids talking. And I thought, oh, I don't know if my kids are going to want to do this because they're kind of old now. We had the best time doing it together, and it turned out to be great. So thanks for that.
Wonderful.
Maria, tell us what, in your opinion, how parents can think about older kids.
Okay, my internet is not doing well, so I sort of heard your question.
Okay.
So I'm going to piggyback on some of what Steve was saying. I'll take sort of the structuring idea, I think, at a very basic level, because I think teens, of course, may fight against some of the structure. You can't force it on them. And I think right now, as parents, we're feeling particularly anxious about our kids being productive because we've had so many challenges with distance learning and them missing instruction. And so summer is not the time to try to make up for everything that was lost during the last 10 weeks of school. So I think it's really important to keep it super simple. I like to focus on really structuring. Sleep is still important for them to structure. I think when you have tweens to early teens, you can still set reasonable bedtimes and wake times. With older kids, I suggest setting more of the wake up time and letting them play around with their bedtime. Really just kind of educating them on why it's important that they're up during the day and sleeping at night. We know kids are in a better mood and are more productive if they're up during the day. I think just having some basic things that you expect that you want them to accomplish, the sleeping, exercise, being outdoors, give them a couple chores, and let them play around with when they're going to do it, how they're going to do that, and allow for them then to have time to do the other things that they're wanting as well. I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Maria. So I want to circle back on some of you had talked about strengths and finding out what our kids are naturally good at or what they want to do, because we all know that if our kids want to do something, they're more likely to follow through. And Sara, I'm wondering if I could start out with you. For younger kids, how do you help younger kids determine that?
Yeah, and so your sticky note activity is actually a great idea, and sort of piggyback off of that one. I actually took my kids, I got this idea from a friend, but I thought it was great. And we just, first of all, asking them, what's important to them. You may want to, I have a lot of friends who are saying, we're going to get above ground pools. What are these kids going to do all summer? The pools are going to be closed. And, maybe your kid only likes to swim with friends, right? And they're not even going to enjoy that pool that you spend all this time doing. So, first of all, find out what's important to them. But I sat my kids down and just said, what is it that and they're young, but what is it that you want to succeed at this summer? What are some things that you really enjoy doing? And let's make a list from simple things to, I want to learn how to do a somersault or climb that really big tree in the backyard. Really simple things to, larger ones. I really, I loved traveling. I miss airplanes. Maybe we can go to the local, small air park and have a picnic and watch the independent planes go in and out. So things like that. We've also done, I'm real social, and I miss the social and the parties and having friends over and whatnot. So we do Saturday nights, we'll have a Zoom party and we'll plan it all day long. And, the kids will, make balloon arts or whatnot and get really excited, and we'll get dressed up and put on makeup and come down and have our Zoom party, and we'll plan the meal. So thinking about what their interests are and just bringing those sort of into that structure in that day.
I love that, Sara. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Allison, what do you think?
Sure. Actually, I think Nicole's going to pop up a handout that will be in some of the materials that we're sending everyone that talks about how to determine your family's strengths. And she'll put it up on the screen share and then you can look at it. So it's a quick way to look at what are my family strengths? And you really could just print it out and take it to your family and say, gosh, what are we good at as a family? And younger kids could circle it. Older kids would just say, I think we're good at this, this, and this. You know, make it fun with a little bit of food so that they can roll their eyes and at least be eating something yummy, you know. So just, it can literally be a 5-minute conversation or less. What do we think we're good at? And what's your one thing? So my son's one thing is he wants to get a hamster. He wants a pet, and we've narrowed it down to a hamster because they don't live 30 years like a turtle. And my daughter wants to make up parodies with her friend. And then my other son has a soccer move he wants to learn because he's especially good at soccer. So it can just be one thing. I think we should keep it simple and let it flow from kind of what's going on around us, and that's okay. So that's kind of how I would go about use a sticky note activity, use something visual like this sheet to sit down with your family. And I think it's really a matter of just paying attention in a different way. We all like people to pay attention to us in our family, at least in some way, whether tweens would say that or not. I think they do enjoy that. So you can pull that down. Now, 2 questions that came up in the chat that I just want to say something quick about. I'm happy to share a schedule, a template schedule for a 7-year-old. I can pass that around afterwards, but I think think of morning as your productive time. A little bit like school, mid-morning to midday is probably your active time where you're going to eat and move and not get sleepy after lunch. And then afternoon would probably be a more naturally creative time. It depends on the family and the kids and what you have to get done. And then the last thing is about screen time. I heard a talk by Dr. Clifford Sussman this week on screen time, and he talked about high dopamine versus low dopamine activities, with online gaming being super high dopamine. But I do think we're going to have to rethink our screen time to look at low dopamine screen activities, which are the ones that produce less surges, so that we're not always activating our dopamine and keeping ourselves so on the way gaming does. And so this week I did a group with a bunch of 5th grade boys, and we did a Draw-a-saurus, which is basically online Pictionary. And even though we were online, they were really connecting socially with their minds and who they were. And so I think we do have to rethink screens in a different way. If we can just pick screen time that's less activating, like full on gaming where you're actually kind of, shooting or whatever, and you don't have social connection, then that's higher dopamine. Lower dopamine where there's more social interaction and perhaps more use of different parts of your mind.
I like that.
Sure.
That's interesting. Thank you so much, Allison.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so how about the older kids? How do we help them tackle their strengths? Steve and Maria, I'll start with you, Steve.
So I guess one of the things I think about for the older kids, and I'm also guided by, people that I work with, the teens, and I think one of the best elixirs for all of us in these times is when we have a sense that we're helping somebody in some way. And, I've had some discussions with some kids around kind of like virtual volunteering opportunities. Like they've talked about maybe going through some old clothes and sorting it to take it to a donation center as an example. I've had one entrepreneur teen that's really thinking about setting up a not-for-profit virtual venture to help something with the environment. And so I think part of like really praising and promoting when these kids have these creative ideas, like how can I turn it in to something to help somebody else? That's a wonderful way of bringing out strength. And it's a creative way, again, through brainstorming. So for whatever that's worth, I thought that was interesting this week.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you, Steve. Maria, how about determining older kids?
Sure. I love these activities, and I think some teens will get really excited about it, and I think other teens will be like, you want me to sit down? And so one of the things I love to do is to send a calendar invite to teens. So whenever I have, like when I was going through the college process with one of my kids and we had to have these college conversations, I was driving her nuts because I would want to have them like during breakfast and what about this? And so I came up with this idea of let's schedule these meetings. That way I'm not going to just talk about college all the time. or I'm not just going to talk about what your summer plans are all the time. We're going to schedule this meeting as a family and talk about all of this. So I think some teens need a little bit more of like a little prep time to know that they're going to be doing it, telling them what they're going to be doing ahead of time. And I agree. I mean, finding things that they're good at and they like doing, and figuring out how to make it something that's fun, that teaches others. Maybe, like, for example, one of my kids loves baking. She's like, I would love to bake every day, but you're not going to want me to bake every single day. And I said, well, what about if you did bake and we figured out a way to take that activity and do something for someone else with it? So what if you taught your little cousins how to bake via, you know, videoing and Zooming with them, and you could show them how to bake cookies, and then their parents get an hour off and they could sit and you could engage with them? What about if we go out to our listserv and say, does anybody know how we could get homemade baked goods to people on the front lines in healthcare and other options, or senior living centers? So I think really, when things interest them, you are going to get so much more from them.
Thank you, Maria. I love the idea of giving back. That's so helpful. So I just have 2 more questions, and we only have about 5 more minutes before we're going to go to the Q&A. So I'd love to start out with some ways to promote learning. So Sara and Allison, for the little kids, can one of you recommend something that can be helpful?
Sure, I can do that. As an OT, you know, I always think about, or we always think about, movement and sensory. You know, it's not always about getting in a book or you know, teaching the ABCs or 1, 2, 3 or whatnot. Sometimes it's just getting outside and making a garden and getting your hands dirty and learning about how to plant. And, you know, you can count and do a lot in the garden if you wanted to bring that learning into it. But thinking about all those senses and how can, you know, we look up in the sky and, you know, just say something about the clouds, or your baking with Maria, you know, has so much sensory in that, and getting on, you know, the play set in the back. So think about movement and sensory and imaginative play and all that kind of stuff with the kids. There's so much learning that comes from doing that.
That's a good point. I think we probably often forget about that.
Right.
Thank you so much, Sara. And what about for the older kids, Steve and Maria? What are some ways that we can integrate learning?
Well, I would say one thing I'd love to say about trying to get this out of teens, because that can sometimes be difficult, is to really focus on, I really like to think about motivational interviewing, which is it's a therapeutic approach, but it's a great parenting approach, where sort of think back to the Columbo series, where he just sort of sat back and questioned and pondered with them. And, you know, there's an acronym called RULE, R-U-L-E. R is resist telling them what to do. U is understand what they want to do. L is listen with empathy, and E is encourage. And so I think it's really about, what do they want to learn about? Do they want, you know, they may want to prep for a challenging class that's coming up, and they may want to do a little bit of the groundwork early on. Do they want to get into a language? Do they want to, I mean, you can do anything by Zoom now, Zoom guitar lessons. You know, do they want, what about ways for them to earn money? I mean, kids can still, I am watching kids all over my neighborhood put things on the listserv of how they are out there trying to find ways to make money and volunteer and still do some version of an internship that they can put on their resume, ask friends, ask family, ask neighbors if they know anybody. And a lot of times kids can come up with some really cool things to do this summer virtually.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria. Oh, Steve, go ahead.
I was just going to put a plug in for what you were saying, Maria, because I about fell out of my chair this week at dinner. We had more of an organic conversation with the boys at the table about what do you think about for the summer. And one of my sons said, I think maybe I just need to get some tutoring to help me with, you know, some of the learning stuff. And I thought, I got to call Ann Dolin. This has got to work. But it's amazing. It's just amazing how things can just happen organically. And that's where, at least in my family, what we've certainly welcomed is bringing the family dinner time back. And again, your rule perspective, Maria, really on point. And I didn't hurt myself when I fell out of my chair, but I had to hold back. I had to hold back saying, yes, do it. Anywho.
Thanks, Steve. I was worried about you when you fell out of your chair.
Yeah, it happens.
My last question is really about family communication. As our kids, you know, we've all been in isolation for so long, and as we're back re-entering, what is that going to be like? How are we going to have that discussion with our kids and even the other adult in the house, if there is one? What will that look like? So I'm wondering if anybody has thoughts on that. And Allison, I'm going to start with you, and if anyone wants to chime in, that would be great.
Yeah, I can jump in. That there are a few handouts that'll come after on a family communication plan and parent-to-parent communication and different types of communication we can have among and between parents based on the level of crisis that we've been dealing with. But I think first and foremost, I mean, we don't have to be too complicated. You can look at that and come up with a few talking points or bullet points that you need to have with your family. And I would say, like, use whatever feelings come up for you as a parent as a little bit of a clue as to what you might need. Of course, we're feeling anxiety. And sometimes when it comes to working out family plans, we may feel some irritation or anger if we're not really in alignment, right? That's natural. And whenever we have anxiety and anger, those are signal feelings. And usually it means we need something. We either need attention or protection. And so that's a way of thinking about, okay, what's this experience that I'm having or family members are having that then can help me clue into what our needs are. Of course, we need some protection in this situation. And if we're feeling too anxious or too frustrated or irritated with how our family is dealing with it, it may mean we need to come back to the drawing board and keep that conversation going and seek a little bit more alignment, especially in the parents first and then talking to the kids. And then the second piece is, how do we start talking to other parents as the isolation is lifting some? And I think the biggest piece, I mean, in some ways, we're having to kind of safely come out of whatever our isolation is into a comfortable germ circle. And so being able to focus more on kind of the what versus the why, what are we really dealing with? And using neutral language as much as possible, especially if there's a lot of feeling that's coming up. And of course, the I statements and all that, like, I'm concerned about this, I'm wanting to do this, always goes much further than you're doing this or you're not doing this. So those are a few tips. It's outlined more specifically, but.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Those handouts are going to be great. And so I appreciate you preparing those for us. We'll send those out to everybody. All right, let's jump into the Q&As. Steve, this one is for you. Can you repeat the 5 P's again? And in addition to the prior planning, can you talk a little bit about dealing with those kids in between, not the younger, not the older, but like that 9 to 12 crowd in terms of planning out their summer?
So the 5 Ps, and I typed it in the bottom when I got a message about it, proper planning prevents poor performance. And there's another phrase that I like to say to people, particularly some of us who are anxious around it being perfect. It doesn't have to be a perfect plan. We can make it bad to make it better. And the idea of it is, I like what Allison was bringing up about chunking the day, that if what parents do of any age is they just chunk the day, that, you know, there's no screen time or there's no, online access, because the morning times are productive for us. And whatever productive means may be, are you doing gardening? Are you, making it more of how do I say, like a rubric that once you accomplish thus and such, then you're able to get to the screen time versus just an absolutely open day to do whatever you want, I think is dangerous. And that's what a lot of parents are concerned about as we come into the summertime. There's going to be no school. There's going to be no summer activities. So I think the fear is what's going to happen with all the screen time now. So,
Yeah, and that's a great point, Steve, because that really brings us to our next question. A mom asked, she said, my son plays Minecraft for about 3 hours a day, and he plays with a couple of his friends. So there's actually activities, and she's really capped it at 3 hours, and she and the other parents are in agreement. And she's wondering, does that sound about right?
I mean, I would, I would just say that thank goodness to have parents that are all in agreement because when you come at it together and all the I mean, I think again, they're going to have a little more screen time. We don't want it to be all screens, but there is some flexibility. And I think if everybody agrees on 3 hours, and the main thing is that your kids are doing other things, right? So if that's all they're doing and then you can't get them engaged in other activities, then 3 hours may be too much. But if they're doing the 3 hours and they're coming downstairs and they're going out and riding their bike and they're doing this and that, then, you know, to me, it sounds like it's probably fine.
Great. Thank you,
Yeah.
Maria.
Yeah, and I would add, and I can pass this video on to share. I shared it with my group of 5th grader boys. It's important for them to develop a little like game awareness. What's their gaming awareness? Like, do they know when they start to get grumpy and when they get that game head, you know, where they're like can't have a conversation or they're coming out and they're feeling like sort of fuzzy, and just talking about the brain science, the difference between the dopamine and the serotonin and everything that's getting activated, I think helps kids like, oh, and do you lose track of time? If you lose track of time, then you're probably have been on too long, and maybe you would just try to give yourself breaks every now and then, you know, and pose that to them. Maybe not every time they get to do 3 hours, and that's fine in this situation. But wow, you like, what does it feel like when you take a break every hour? Does your brain feel different?
Can I add one? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Steve, you go.
No, I was just going to piggyback. I did a talk a few months ago to a group of parents, and to Allison's point around kids are very observant of their own experience. We're seeing more and more teens sort of talking about like an online fatigue. And with this one group of parents a while ago, I had mentioned one of the ways to kind of bring this up is to ask, you know, noticing questions. Like, for instance, to the kid, do you notice how you feel after you've been playing for 3 hours? And it's just interesting, some of the feedback I've gotten back in the last 2 weeks from that same attendees, and that was back in October. They're like, the notice question really worked well because it's non-judgmental. It's just, what do you notice when you're on, you know, for 3 hours? Or what do you notice when you're not going to bed? It's amazing how they're engaging. So I thought that was excellent, Allison. Sorry, Maria.
No, I would just add, it made me think of something personal. One of my younger kids has started playing Fortnite. I'm not really, my kids, I have a lot of girls, so gaming hasn't been a big thing for us. But I started noticing a lot more Fortnite was happening. And so one of the things we decided to do was to take the Fortnite group, because it's a group of girls, and the Fortnite group of girls is now doing a painting class. One of my therapists happens to be an artist, so she's doing a painting class for the Fortnite kids. So it's like taking that group that's really connected and giving them something else to do besides just doing Fortnite. It's just another thing I was thinking of as you were talking.
Sweet.
That's great, Maria. It's so creative. Thank you for sharing that. So I've had this question from parents before, and I'm wondering if somebody wants to pop in to address it. This mom says, my teenage boys play team sports, but they hate practicing on their own. Any idea on how to get them out and moving?
That's a tough one. I mean,
it is a tough one.
I have one idea that I'll steal from a friend, and I mean, I don't know. It depends on how well you know the coaches, right? But this one friend of mine's son, his baseball coach actually has continued meeting with them and has a group of high school boys cooking together on Wednesday nights, which I just thought was a great idea to use that mentoring role. And they're still practicing some, but they kind of know there's limits there, so they're keeping up that social engagement. And then of course there's more motivation to want to do any of the workouts that he passes on. They don't have the fun connecting time on the field the way they used to, and that's super motivating for kids, so you just kind of have to acknowledge that that's missing. So if there's any coach participation in that, that's a great thing to call upon.
Well, and to
Yeah.
add, can they do a competition with their friends? I think just because you can't be with your friends doesn't mean you can't have competition in other ways. So, you all are trying to improve on a skill, and how can you create sort of competition at who can do it, more or better or faster or whatnot
I like that.
than the other one.
Yeah. And lastly, I would say leverage technology. I mean, use Apple Watches and things like that to really track fitness and steps and put them in competition together. We have to try to make technology, use it for our benefit too, and what we're trying to do with our kids.
Good point. Thank you all. So the next question is, what kind of reading-based activities and games could kids do? And I can start with answering that, and then I will turn it over to you guys. So I'm going to share my screen really quick and go back to the PowerPoint that I have for this afternoon, and share with you a couple of ideas. So let me do my slideshow from the. So these are a couple of things that you can do with kids. One is, this mom asked about reading, and I found Amazon's query to work really, really well for kids. So for example, if you have a middle school girl who loves horses, you can type in books about horses for reluctant readers, or books about horses for middle school girls, and Amazon will actually populate a whole list for you. I also love Audible books for kids. There's nothing wrong with a child listening to a book. It's even better if they follow along as they read. There's also a couple of writing resources that I can share with you. And this is one that our tutors do with kids. It's by a fellow named John Spencer, and he has an amazing YouTube page. And if you have a reluctant writer, and I found that many of our students with ADHD or executive function issues often don't love to write, but it's important. These are prompts that are super motivating to kids, and kids love them, and it really gets kids going. And then this is a website called No Red Ink, which helps also with grammar and writing, and I like it because kids can pick the things that they're interested in. For example, it will say, what TV shows do you like, and what movies do you like? And you can click on all the things you like. Who are your favorite football players? Or who are your favorite hockey players? What's your name? What are your friends' names? What are your pets' names? And then all the questions that the site asks you are to practice grammar and writing are all about, they're filled with the characters you like, your friends' names, your pets' name, so that it's super personalized to you. And I found that that's really motivating to kids. So these are examples of skills that kids can practice. And then this is another site called Brain Pop, which I love for kids. And it's awesome. So if your child wants to learn coding, they can click on the engineering tech, or if they want to practice English and reading, whatever they want to practice. And then this is what a breakout looks, so they can study things of interest to them over the summer. And that usually goes further than us telling kids what to do, when they can pick their own things. All right, so anybody else have thoughts on reading-based activities before we go to our last couple of questions?
I would just add that yesterday I read a great Wall Street Journal article that it's all on summer technology, and it has some of the things that you mentioned, Anne, and just has incredible recommendations for technology for all kinds of things for kids at lots of different ages. The other thing I think that's fun that I'm doing is sort of taking my younger child back to my day and sort of reading things that I loved reading. So right now we're reading Judy Blume. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret,
Yes.
and Tiger Eyes, and like, it's fun, especially if you can read the book with them or read separately and talk about it. So, sometimes kids are interested in things that we used to like reading, and is making sure it's at their, appropriate level is also another idea.
Oh my gosh, I love Judy Blume. That brings back.
I know, I love
Maria.
it.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. All right, here's our, if we have time for another, we'll do it, but this might be our last one. So what about middle schoolers who are resistant to doing anything other than screen time? They'd rather sit in the room and be bored and just wait until it's time for screens. And this causes a lot of tension. Anybody have a thought on that?
I think I can speak to that a little bit. I work with a lot of middle schoolers in it, but it's different having one at home, and I have one at home too. And I've been trying to join with and extend my daughter's screen time. So for instance, this week we're watching all her favorite movies in this one series. And I've seen them, most all of them before, but I'm doing a movie night with her with the hopes of kind of bringing her along. Perhaps I'm going to buy her that series of books or something like that. And the other thing is I bought her a book the other day that's a movie she loves. She's seen the movie, but she hasn't read the book. And so that's a little bit compelling. It's hard. It's hard. And I think the biggest thing as a parent is to really catch that nagging part of us that comes up when we're frustrated. So I've just been trying to enter the space differently, more playfully, a little bit more like a middle schooler, using a funny voice or kind of not being so parent-like as I'm checking in and saying hello, and trying not to have all my check-ins be from I need you to do this today. I think that's helped some, actually.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would just add that, again, I think this time is I think we're seeing that kids are having more and more trouble as time's going on. So while kids, 2 months ago, 8 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I probably would have said a lot of kids are doing pretty well. But we are seeing a sharp rise in kids that are needing some support through this, and parents and couples. And so, I think keeping that in mind as you see kids being somewhat resistant or wanting to just escape into their technology, and just really thinking about that as sort of a backdrop to what's going on with some kids right now.
That's a great point, Maria. I agree. It's gotten harder for our kids. Well, as we wrap up, I wanted to share a resource with everyone, and it's an ebook that I have for this exact time, homeschooling kids during coronavirus. And so let me share that with you really quick. Here it is. And if you're interested in getting a copy of it, it's about 14 pages. It's super quick to read, and I just updated it the other day. Just text 55444 and then type in homeschool, and that will be delivered to your inbox. So I hope that you've all found this to be helpful today. Talking about summer, I want to really thank my guests tremendously, Maria, Sara, Steve, and Allison. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Parents, you can expect a recording of this webinar along with the resources that many of our panelists recommended, and that should arrive in your inbox later today. Thank you all so much. I wish you a great rest of the school year and a productive start to your summer.
Yes.
Great day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Stay safe.